All right. Hello, Robert. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. So you're not Tim Herron, but Tim is busy this week. So you've graciously stepped in to make sure we don't miss a week of the new nascent Lowport podcast.
If
So
you
thank
want, I mean, I
you
could
very
lower my
much.
chair a little bit.
That would make me feel more comfortable.
Oh, okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, our average height is just a little too high for this podcast.
It is. It's
Thank.
actually it is really nice to see Tim and you like get back and do a show. Tim's always been such a really great voice in the community, just like being willing to like talk to people, and the fact that you decided to actually put another thing together and make that outlet. It's been a lot of fun listening to the show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that feedback, especially from such an experienced podcaster as yourself. But we're really lucky here in New Mexico, Albuquerque area to have a pro shooter, GM, professional trainer kind of guy like Tim.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, not let that go to waste and put that out into the world, especially for the local community here, to try to, create a funnel and some accessibility for people to get into practical shooting. Doesn't have to be USPSA, could be anything. But I really, one of my missions with this podcast was to try to grow the community in this area. And with Tim around, it was just something I couldn't really pass up. So I'm glad he was willing to jump into this with me and
Yeah.
put a face on practical shooting.
No, and it really is good. I mean, so much of practical shooting is just the outreach. And I think so I like with the new shooter match that I run here in Utah, I always tell people whenever we have that match, I always tell people like the single hardest thing you're ever going to do shooting, whether it's USPSA, IDPA, or three gun, is showing up for your first match. And everybody thinks that you have to be something like John Wick with a gun to before you can even like shoot. And the reality is that some people are good, some people are not so good, but almost all of us in between. And if you can just show up to that first match, you find that there is a whole group of people who are so excited about this game that they will do everything, including giving the gun on their belt so that you can finish the match. And it's a lot of there's a lot of like hobbies and things like that that share kind of the similar stories, but it's really nice about USPSA, IDPA, three gun, all of it, that there's just so many good people who just really really love this. And for you guys to have, I mean, you and Tim Herron, who are both willing to step out and like help people get into this hobby, it's a big deal because it gives a friendly face so that when a brand new person, kind of musters up the courage, they actually have somewhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've personally been inspired by your new shooter matches that you conduct. I think we can maybe talk a little bit about how you organize those, get people into them, and like your conversion rate for what people become regulars and stuff after doing that. But we haven't actually introduced you yet, I don't think. So why don't you take a second? Most people have seen probably your podcast, the Paracast. It's much longer running and more popular than our new podcast here. But just in case anybody doesn't know who you are, why don't you kind of give the rundown on all of that?
Well, my name is Robert Wyatt. I shoot USPSA among other things, although I sort of got kicked out of IDPA, so I pretty much only shoot USPSA at this point.
Yeah.
But
You wore
I
the vest and nothing else, and apparently that's a problem.
you know what? I mean, they said concealment. They didn't say how much had to be concealed. I mean, I thought I was okay, but apparently Joyce didn't. You know, sucks to be me. But no, IDPA is a great game. I shouldn't say that mostly. Um, but no, I co-host a podcast with Tom Nelson and Jared Stepp, Kenny Terry, Steve Koski, called the Paracast. Tommy started it forever and ever ago. There was a podcast called The Gun Dudes, and that ran for a while. And when it kind of went away a little bit, Tommy really wanted to keep doing something. And he started up a show called Paracast, and I kind of joined it and never seemed to leave. And so we just did our 402nd episode, And that's it's a fair thing to say that's pretty rarefied air in the podcasting world. I've heard numbers that say that if you can get to 20 episodes, you've actually done better than the vast majority of people. And so to hit 400 was pretty cool. When we hit 3, we thought we were doing good, but you just kind of keep plugging along, and it's a lot of fun. It's just a general interest shooting show.
Well, I will say the first shooting podcast I ever listened to was your show.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, it was probably about 5 years ago. A buddy of mine, Drew Solomon, who lives out here and is another match director for 3 Gun at the
Yeah.
same club where I've started a USPSA club now. We were driving out to shoot Hard as Hell, which is like a crazy, intense 3 gun match that they do out in St. George, Utah, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm at least at the time, I wasn't a podcast guy. I didn't listen to any podcasts. And he was like, we should listen to this show. There was a really funny episode. And so he put on your show, and it was the one where Tom talks about having like a bunch of squibs and then turning the gun on the crowd and getting on the news.
He's going to turn
And
around and get
we
on the
were,
news.
oh my
Yeah.
God, we were just dying in the car, man. It was so funny. And so you guys kind of hooked me with that. That was podcast gold for sure. And it was talking about the autistic kind of shooting stuff that I love. So you guys have a niche for sure. And you were a great entry point for me.
It's
To listen to
it's
some
a
other
good
podcasts.
show because it doesn't really take itself too seriously, and fundamentally people ask, like, what's the show about? And basically the show is water cooler talk. It's what a bunch of guys talk about when they stand around the water cooler or just after the match, and they're just talking about this, that, and the other, how I did on this stage, how, I mean, just everything under the sun. And I think that's one of the things that's helped make it last so long. Plus, Tom Nelson is, I mean, he's one of my best friends in the world, but he's just got a gift for gab, and he can run a conversation and keep things going. And I think it's just been such a great opportunity to be involved with it. And it's the craziest thing because you travel all over the country and you have people that come up and like, "Hey, I love the show," and I'm like, "Thank you." I mean, I really appreciate that you listen, but it's
It's
awesome.
it's it's a super entertaining show, and 400 episodes in plus, it's still great. So yeah, you guys have some chemistry going. That's really awesome. So congrats.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you. It's a lot of
Please
fun.
keep going.
Well, I'm not good at anything else, so I think we'll keep going until Tommy kicks me off. But I have the password, so I guess he can't kick me off too much.
I really appreciate Tommy because I like to just try out all sorts of different guns and buy different guns, and I have a collection of guns I almost never shoot, mostly 9mm service grade pistols. But
Yeah.
he exceeds me in that space. He just can't keep his hands off
Well,
every nine
and
millimeter polymer pistol in the
yeah,
world. It seems like.
and I think that's what makes Tommy such a uniquely good shooter in his own right. Is that, I mean, it is so easy to get, your one gun. I've got this gun. This is the only gun I have, and I'm really good with this one gun. But you put another gun in their hands, and it's like, no. But Tommy, he'll bounce around and he'll try different guns, and he'll get really excited about the HK today. And it's a running joke on the show, like, wait 3 months and he'll have forgotten about it. But at the same time, Tommy's extremely proficient with all those. And there's a lot to be said for a well-rounded shooter who can just pick up a firearm and be competent with it. And that's Tommy. He's excellent.
Well, I think what it is he is very good at understanding the process of shooting,
Yeah,
acquiring the proper sight picture, doing what you have to do to prep and break the trigger and all of that. And so he can apply that across different guns. Um,
absolutely.
and that's an important versatile skill, especially for us competition guys, because generally we're not like carrying for self-defense the same gun that we rock on our belts for matches or stuff like that. So being able to apply that process to different platforms
Well, yeah, I
is
mean, like,
important.
what is competitive shooting other than applying the fundamentals at a different pace? You're just applying the fundamentals over and over and over again, and your ability to execute those things. I mean, that's what they say about, like, once you get to like an A class shooter, like a D class shooter can probably do like 60% of what a GM can do. And the C and on up. The GMs, they just can do all of those fundamentals at a much, much more consistent rate. And that's really what it comes down to. It's just executing the fundamentals over and over again at a higher level.
Exactly right. But I think for truly like high level people, nationally competitive GMs and stuff like that, to to really be at your highest level of performance, you have to have those fundamentals dialed in. But being used to a single platform actually makes a big deal too, because stretching out the predictive shooting distance,
Sure.
I think, is a big part of that.
That
But
makes sense.
yeah. I know whenever I switch platforms, which I'm very guilty of, there's always a learning curve where I have a lot of problems because that platform doesn't behave like the last one. So what you could get away with or couldn't is different, and they're laying up unnecessarily or throwing penalties and stuff like that unnecessarily.
So here's the question for you though, because at the indoor match, we kind of at the end of 2023, we started having this conversation about, hey, it's the wintertime. Why don't we shoot our concealed carry guns? And so I did that, and I talked about this on the show a little bit, where I was using my Shield Plus, and the first time I used it, I pulled the gun out from concealment. I was appendix carry. I pulled the gun out from concealment, and I tried to shoot the gun like my Shadow 2, which is a noticeably heavier gun than that. But it took me about a stage and a half before I settled in and I understood what the gun. I basically let the gun tell me a story. I'm like, okay, this is what the gun is actually needs to do in order for me to run it effectively. And so, I guess my question to you is, I mean, even when you're bouncing to another platform, whether it's your competition gun to a concealed carry gun, how much do you think the fundamentals that you've learned in one platform, how long does it take you to transfer that information over?
It's it's a tough question, really. I think to really eke out every ounce of performance from a platform, it actually probably takes maybe a couple thousand rounds to get used to that. But to largely make an adjustment from shooting something like a Shadow 2 to a Shield or vice versa or whatever, I think you can get probably 80% of the way there, maybe in 50 rounds or something like that.
Yeah.
It's the same concept of diminishing returns that applies across the sport and maybe like many sports. Like the the ramp up of skill and outcome is really fast, but then to get to those upper tiers,
Hmm.
it's exponentially more effort to get a much smaller gain.
Yeah, and Tim talks about that a lot. Where I mean, once I mean, those higher levels, just I mean, just more and more effort just to get those little ekes of performance. But like when we have new shooters that are looking to get into competitive shooting, they come to the matches. There's two things that are really interesting. I mean, the first is just the kit that these guys are showing up with. I mean, you're seeing people now with 2011s. At our last match, we had two brand new shooters who showed up with very, very nicely modified Shadow 2s in single action only shooting limited optics, and that's not an insignificant amount of money. But I've heard from a lot of the guys, the new people that show up. You'll see people that'll show up kind of with more racy stuff, but then you'll see some people that'll show up with their concealed carry guns, whether it's a 365 or whatever. And sometimes you'll have people that are like, well, I'm doing this for training, and I think that's awesome because people they come into this sport and they're looking to get whatever it is out of it that they want, and you have to encourage that. And along the way, some of those same guys, they may go buy themselves like a P320 or something like that, and want to do a little bit more competitive. But the nice thing about USPSA is, yes, we're all running these super like fast racy guns like what you have, but people show up with the gun that they have and they can have a lot of fun. They can learn. And if they decide they want to take it to the degree like where you and Tim are at, they have that opportunity, but they can still learn a tremendous amount. And the thing that we've noticed and found with the new shooter match and making that such an very open and welcoming environment is, um, I can go through the SLPSA, which is our big local match. I can go through SLPSA. I can go to any one of the squads on any Saturday, and I can point to somebody who came from that new shooter match.
Wow.
And I'm
So
kind of
you're
proud of
seeing a
that.
lot of like people sticking with it after they come through your new shooter match.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but I can, but you're hanging on to enough of them that they will. Because my goal when I started that match, the whole point of an introduction to competitive shooting or USPSA was when I very first started, I had nobody. I got my so what happened is I went and I got a concealed carry license. And when I did that, I was like, cool, I have this license, and the license in Utah is very easy to get. Basically, if you're breathing and can pass a background check, you're going to get the license.
As
But
it
I
should
got,
be.
yeah, I agree. Honestly, I don't think you should even have a license, but since we'd have one, that's how it should be. But I was like, in my head, I'm like, well, I have this thing, but am I actually competent with a firearm? And I'm like, no, I'm not. And so I was like, I'm going to go find somebody to teach me. And I happened to be at a local gun show, and there was a guy there, and he was teaching classes, and and it clicked. So I took his class with my wife, and we went out, we did this class. And at the end, he's like, hey, you should, if you like this, you should consider competition because if you if you really want to do this, the best people who are the best shooters are ultimately competitive shooters. And I'm like, okay, that sounds cool. How do I get involved? He's like, well, there's this thing called IDPA, and you can look it up on the internet, and it'll find places to go. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? He's like, you'll just have to look online because I'm not really big into it. I was like, but so I come home and I just start doing any kind of a Google search. I can't find out. This is before practice score. We didn't have anything, but I somehow found a Facebook group. It was like Utah Defensive Pistol Shooting or Utah Defensive Pistol or something like that. And it led me to a match. And so I we didn't have all the cool videos that we have now, like the Ben Stagers and the Tim Herons, all that stuff that's online. And I knew enough that I was going to show up at this IDPA match. I knew enough not to show up there like in like camouflage pants and like tactical gear. I knew I didn't want to do that.
Ghillie suit.
Yeah, but at the same time, I didn't know what I didn't know, and so I showed up to this new shooter match or this IDPA match, and I was lucky, and I found
Best
exactly what I
only.
say. Yes, exactly. No, no, I waited till the second match to show up without anything else on. But I found Steve
Best
Goski.
only and one minted. One
Yes.
minted.
But that's when we started that match. That was the whole point of that was to not have to have new shooters go through that same experience. And so the idea is to create this on ramp, so
Well, I
to
think
make it easy to get people in.
well, I think it's really cool that you do that because, it's hard enough to get people to come out to a normal match in the first place. And then, there's a super low turnover rate of folks who show up to a normal match that become regulars and like stick in the sport for at least a few years or something like that.
Yeah.
And so with your new shooter match, it sounds like that that conversion rate is actually much higher. And so that's really cool. I would love to start doing something like that here in New Mexico.
And I
Um,
think I think you can. I think anybody can do it. The biggest hurdle that you have to overcome is divorcing yourself from the idea that this is a match in the strict sense. You have to really come at it from a teacher's mentality and understand that you're going to go through and you're going to explain to you, here are the rules. Don't point the gun at Robert. And inside of that, you have to have enough understanding that new shooters are going to do new shooter things. And if we can keep them in the new shooter match, then we should do that. And one of the things that you
yeah,
find with
absolutely.
standard USPSA matches, and this is correct, is somebody breaks a rule, they're DQ'd, and that's correct. That is a correct thing to do. But for a new shooter, if you torch them the very first time they ever show up, odds are extremely high they're never coming back again.
Yeah.
And so the new shooter match is designed with the idea of I'm going to have ROs that are going to help me, and I trust these ROs. And I'm going to stand off to the side and I'm going to watch the shooters. And if they do something like what they always do, which is they run around with their finger in the trigger guard. Okay, well then I'm going to pull them off to the side after they've shot, and I'm like, look, this is what I saw. Here's how to fix this. Here's what you need to do. Just things like that. I'm going to show them how to fix problems before they get to what I consider to be the real match, so that when they go into that match, they at least have a little bit of a foundation, so that they're kind of a little bit more prepared and not just burned on the first. I actually think that more than any other factor is what keeps people in. Actually, gives me the conversion rate.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So the first USPSA match I did was pretty quickly after I started doing shooting and competitions in general. I started with 3 gun,
Mm-hmm.
but a few months in, I went and tried a USPSA match, and uh, there was a situation where like I had to do a lateral run to the left, and I'm left-handed, but I shoot with my right hand, and
Yeah,
so I started like running and pumping, and probably extremely blatantly broke the 180, but somebody just screamed muzzle at me 3 or 4 times until I got the idea, and they didn't DQ me.
yeah.
And I don't know. I had a positive match experience. I didn't get DQ'd. I still learned a lesson, and here I am many years later, still doing the sport. So maybe it would have turned out differently if I had been DQ'd. So I
Well,
think what you're saying is it rings true for me on a personal level.
and I think for a lot of people, how I mean, there's always the statement inside of USPSA, like when it comes to DQs, there's those that have and those that will be. Eventually, we're all going to get DQ'd. But inside of that new shooter thing, I've actually created a paper that it's my muzzle. That's what I call the muzzle awareness drill, and it's a very simple drill that teaches people how to keep a gun safely pointed downrange. Because what you find in USPSA is the single biggest reason that people get DQ'd by like a large order of magnitude is breaking the 180. And I hand that out to every single new shooter, and I even give it at the new shooter orientation that we do at SLPSA that I run, or when I because I always do that. And it's like I tell them, like, look, you can throw this away if you want, but if all you do is go home and you practice this thing for 15 minutes for a week, you're going to develop this feeling sensation in your arm of what it feels like to have a gun safely pointed down range, and you will literally have solved like 80% of the DQs that you'll ever see in USPSA.
That would
And
be great to see. If you could share that with me, I'd really appreciate it.
yeah, I'll send it over to you. That's not a problem in the world. But it's stuff like that that you get to communicate in a new shooter match that helps the shooters have the best possible expectation of success. And that's what you're going for. We always tell them is like this is a game like any other game in the world. I mean, I would never like open up a brand new game of like Monopoly and expect to be a wizard right out of the box. You got to go around the board 3 or 4 times. I mean, most of the stuff there's so many like little tips and nuances to any game. I mean, even inside of USPSA, that's just like, look, just if you go home with the same amount of holes that you showed up here with, we're going to consider that a big win on the day. And when you come back, you're going to learn a little bit, and we'll just keep going.
Yeah, there's a lot of rules and things to keep in your head, technique, rules, all of that with this game, like many sports. But if you get an offsides penalty in soccer or football, you don't get like sent home.
Right.
Here, you finger in the trigger guard, 180 violation, you get sent home at most matches, and that is definitely demoralizing. So
Yeah,
having
but
like that introductory kind of thing that you're offering, I think is really important for a lot of folks. It gives them a chance
yeah,
to mess up, but also I think there's an ego thing that keeps a lot of people from wanting to go out and shoot. For some reason, shooting, I don't know, maybe it's connected to masculinity or something in some way. Every man wants to think that they're a great shooter, and they're scared to go out and maybe not win a match or something like that, which is extremely likely. And so
that
being around a bunch of other new people might be a psychological, like you're reducing that barrier
it
by
is
offering a new
really
shooter match.
funny you say that because that's absolutely true. At that match, I used to, and I still do to some extent, but I used to like let anybody shoot it who wanted to, And I kind of quickly realized that the new shooters were getting really intimidated watching somebody who's great, like you or Tim Herron or Kenny Terry, like shoot a stage and like, I will never be that. And so I really dialed it back to, and it was like, look, this is only for new shooters. All you good guys, you can come to the regular match next week, but this is only for, and it's only been when I couldn't fill up the match with new shooters that I would open it up to let other people shoot it. But I'd always put them on another squad. They were never allowed anywhere near all of my new people, and I would spend the night just with them. And I would go over that and like, look, you're going to see people that play this game. I mean, this sport, whatever it is, right? You're going to see people that do this, and they devote their lives to it. I mean, they wake up and dry fire. They go to work and they secretly dry fire. They come home and they're live firing. That's all they do. They're really boring people, but that's what they do. Okay. You may want to be that someday, but you don't have to be.
Yeah. Well, going back to what you were saying originally, like a lot of people show up and they're just like, I just want to get better with what I carry. That's probably like the heart of people in the sport, I would say. And arguably, that's the more meaningful thing to get out of the sport is just improving your proficiency at speed under stress with the gun that you'll trust your life or your family's lives to, right? Like us trying to go win trophies or something like that is like, okay,
Yeah.
neat, but not not really ultimately as meaningful as something like that. And so I think we always want to make sure the door is open to people with that practical intent. I mean, practical is in the name of USPSA, and the P in IDPA is practical too, right?
International Defensive Pistol Association,
Oh,
IDPA. Yeah,
well,
there you go.
never mind.
Close
But
enough.
defensive is in there. That's close enough.
Well, and you're right, though. I mean, IDPA was created with this idea of it was because IDPA was created when there was this rejection of these racer guns, the perception of racer guns inside of USPSA. And so Bill Wilson went off and he created IDPA, which is a fantastic shooting organization devoted to the idea that people would shoot their actual guns that they bought from the store and were going to carry in a defensive situation.
My
And
5-inch comp 2011.
exactly,
That's what
exactly.
I'll carry.
And that's the nature of any shooting thing that as soon as you stick a timer on it, I mean, people are they're gonna push those guns to the nth degree. But that's what makes us in practical shooting so valuable to the industry. The fact that we have guns that have optics on them and they're reliable, that is 100% thanks to us. We're the ones who went out and we torture tested these dots to the point where the manufacturers took all that data and actually produced something that was viable. Because it's great that you have the military that goes out and uses their guns, but they don't use pistols. And so the idea of a slide ride optic that would last more than 100 rounds, it just didn't exist. But we did that. It was us breaking those things. And so we as an organization provide tremendous value to the industry, even as small as we are, because USPSA has like 40,000 people. IDPA, I think, has 25. It's not a ton, but all of these people that are coming out and they're doing exactly what you said. They're starting this thing from it. Like, I want to get better with my gun my pistol, whatever, that I'm going to use for home defense. If they come out and they start shooting this game a little bit, what they're going to find is just everything that we require them to do on the clock will force them to become better at a substantially higher and faster rate than they could do in any other scenario. And they will very quickly find that even a B level shooter is going to
You're
be
better than
better than
most people in the world.
100%. 100%.
Yeah,
I mean,
by far.
most police officers are, I mean, I'm not being a dick, but most police officers, they're somewhere around a C, maybe a
They're worse
B.
than normal shooters, in my observation.
And so, yeah, but here's the fun thing
Yeah,
though, is like the officers, they
especially when there's acorns present.
yes, avoid the acorns. Apparently, it took me a long time to actually figure out what that was meant, and then I finally saw the video, and I'm like, that's just kind of cool. Not for him. He apparently resigned, but for the rest of the
Threat.
world,
Yeah.
I'm hit. But like cops will come out to these matches And if I know they're a police officer or something like that, I always tell them, like, look, it's a game. You're going to see people who are really good. They devote their lives to this thing. But the thing that police officers have that most of us in the civilian world don't is they actually have an academy that gives them a really good set of fundamentals. And with that fundamental, they actually once they learn the game, you find that they advance at a much, much higher and faster rate than all the rest of us do. And those are the same officers who end up they go on to lead like their SWAT teams and a lot of their firearm training divisions inside of police world, whatever they would call that, because USPSA is a fantastic mechanism, and IDPA, all of those are a fantastic mechanism to teach pistol competency.
Yeah, I think that could certainly be true. And there's some classic examples of that. Folks like Bob Vogel,
Yeah.
Jarrett Stepp out by you, and other great officers who've kind of gotten into the competition world and gotten really, really good at shooting.
Yeah.
So,
And you
Robert, how did you formulate like the new shooter match, and how do you? It seems like at least when I was in Utah, it seemed like you were always selling out that match every single month or whatever the interval was that you had it. Did you have to do a lot of work to market that, or what? How did you get such like a high success rate with people wanting to do that?
That's a great question. So I originally just had the normal match. It was just the normal USPSA match, and I would run that twice a month. And along the way, I started having these conversations with people of like, mostly with the guys at SLPSA, saying we need to find a way to make it easy for these new shooters to get involved. And we just had the idea, like, what if we actually just make one match, and it'll just be a new shooter match, and it'll only be for new shooters, and that's it. And everybody's like, okay, that's a great idea, but how are we going to do it out at SLPSA? I mean, because it's just the involvement. And I was like, well, I have a small indoor match. I can do that. And I can, from the perspective of the Armory, they're like, hey, thanks for the money. And so they're they're happy to let me run it whenever I want. I could probably run it every single Thursday. But they really just said, because I had the availability of the bays and I could just bring them in, it made it easy for me to then say, we are going to set this night once a month. We're going to set this night, and this will be a new shooter match. And in that match, it will be just devoted to that. And so what we ended up doing is we used Facebook and our Utah USPSA page, and I said, I am looking to set up this new shooter match. This is what it's going to be. It's going to be new shooters, only new shooters. It's going to be a very simple, this is how to get started in this. And the very first stuff that I ever did, it was basic. I spent like 30, 40 minutes, and I'd go through that new shooter orientation. And then we'd have very simple stages. The first stage was like, start, draw the gun, shoot from one side of the wall, shoot. And that's what we did for a long time. And we'd get a lot of people. Because the word of mouth, what ended up happening is there was enough people after the first two or three matches that we held. The word of mouth kind of started getting out. Hey, there's this new shooter thing. And so you'd have people at the regular match. I kind of say this a little bit, but the SLPSA is the real match to me. It's always been the match. The whole point of the new shooter match was to get people into SLPSA. It was always the funnel used to get people to that match. And I tell people that. But you'd have people at the SLPSA match that would say, hey, are you still running that? And I'm like, yep, it's on this date. Cool. When is sign up? It's going to be this time. Even if they don't get in, just tell them to come. And that's what they do. You'd have more people. And so inevitably, somebody's cousin or something like that, hey, I want to get into this thing. And they'd say, well, go to this new shooter match. And the thing that made it successful was consistency. Everybody knows that once a month there's going to be a new shooter match. And so everybody knows, I mean, unless life happens, right? But everybody knows once a month you're going to have that match. And by being consistent with it, we've just been able to get more and more people in, to the point where we're selling it out every single time. And that actually started in earnest. Early last year, where I was filling it up. And this year I expanded it by 4 slots. It's a small match, right? So I can get like 24 people in there, and I can feel pretty good about doing that. but 24 people that are all new, either between new and mostly new, because I'll let them come a couple times as a new shooter before I'm like, okay, you're good enough. Come to the regular matches. But that's what we do. It's just we just try and be consistent with doing it. And I it sounds like I'm trying to inflate my ego, and I apologize in advance, but I'm a really good RO. I just am, and I have I have the patience to deal with people. And so when somebody does something that would normally get them DQ'd, my inclination is always to teach. And that match is designed to teach. It's always a teaching. And short of somebody doing something really, really dumb, if we can teach you how to solve a problem, then we're going to do that. And I think people have come to actually respect that they're going to show up to a new match and be taught how to be safe and not just be tossed out on their first go. And that's a lot of what has made that match really successful, I think.
Well, that's a lot of great information. So thank you for that. One of the barriers, so the match I run out at, it's a shooting range called Del Norte,
Yeah.
is that for depending on where you live in Albuquerque, you can take almost an hour to get to because it's way up north of town. So hopefully it'll be open for a while before subdivisions encroach on it. But just getting people to drive out there is a challenge.
Yeah.
However, there is a local chain of gun stores called Calibers, and they actually do action shooting. It's outlaw. That doesn't really matter. Pistol matches. And so I think maybe the right vector for us in Albuquerque would be to turn maybe one of those a month or something like that into a new shooter match and kind of integrate some of the lessons that you were just talking about.
Yeah. And the
Um,
other thing you could consider, because I've had actually conversations with a couple of my friends, Yi Min and John Batista. And one of the things that has worked really successful in some of their situations has been at the local mat, at the whatever the local match is. So we hold two a month, but you'll have a new shooter squad, and on that squad you'll actually, because you're going to have to get somebody that's willing to devote their day to it, but you'll treat that like in the same manner that I would treat my new shooter match,
so you've
where
got one or two like experienced shooters with the new
the
people
new
to
guys,
guide them.
yeah, and you help them out and you make them have a successful match. And again, it's an unspoken thing, but there's kind of this understanding that unless these guys do something really sketchy, we're trying to keep them in the match. And that's how we always look at it. And that's where it's hard from an organizational standpoint to create a new shooter thing, because you have to have the expectation that our goal here is to teach. But if we create, even inside of a regular match, if we set a squad, and this is the new person squad, and we're going to have the new shooters be there. We're going to have a couple of really good, competent, and experienced, understanding ROs who really care
Mhm.
about this thing. They're going to basically babysit them the whole time, and we may have to like compensate them a match or do something for them, just something to make it worth their time. Uh, that's a great way to actually help bring new people in, because you're getting them into the sport with an understanding that we're going to help you have a successful time here, and that's our goal first, foremost, and always.
Yeah, a new shooter squad, even in my match, that's another great idea. So I think I will try to incorporate that. So thanks a lot.
Yeah,
And
no, of
just
course.
for the New Mexico people, Robert's talking about SLPSA, which is like the main USPSA club. They do 2 matches a month in Salt Lake City, Utah. And when I was there, it seemed like it was about 80 people would show up to local matches twice a month, which is huge numbers compared to what we have here. An average match is probably like 30 people here for the various USPSA clubs that we have. Really good turnout would be 50.
Yeah,
And
right
as I've
now
been,
we're actually pushing north of 100 on every single
yeah,
match right now.
I looked up your last match and it looked like it was almost 150 or something crazy like that. Or
Oh,
maybe
that's
people were
right.
doing
That's right,
reshoots,
because
but it was just
we actually opened up a Friday squad so you could do that on Friday as well, because we just got so many people.
so that's That's incredible. I mean, Salt Lake is probably has twice as many people as Albuquerque, but even so, like that shows that we could have 60 to 80 people probably in Albuquerque if we had kind of the same proportional rate of turnout. And so that's my
Yeah.
goal. I would like to build the community to be something like that, because everything elevates. The skill of the shooters elevates. The amount of burden that goes into the match goes down as you have more people helping. The amount of good stage designers goes up, so the quality of the stages you shoot improves. It's
Hmm.
just better to have more people contributing, and so that's really what I want to do with my club, and if I can help the other clubs around town, that's my goal. And having lived in Salt Lake for a while and seeing the strength and depth of that shooting community, a lot of which is now um, like strengthened by yourself, that's kind of what I want to do.
And I think you can. And honestly, the biggest things you can do is, I mean, you always, I realize what I'm saying here. As long as you maintain the rules, that's always your big thing. I mean, disregard what we talked about with the new shooter thing. I really think that's a safe thing. But if people have an expectation of success, it goes a long way. And I mean, yeah, I mean, you absolutely will grow that club based on your ability to put on well run and rules driven matches, and it's a great way to go.
Well, awesome. Well, gosh, Robert, this has been a great discussion about creating funnels to grow the sport, the kind of people that might benefit from doing competition shooting, which is honestly everybody, I think, even like more defensively practical minded people.
Hmm.
Um, Anything else you want to throw in about this?
No, I would just say, I mean, no matter where you are in the world, um, everybody starts somewhere. That's the big thing. Everybody starts somewhere, and it's just like I said earlier on. Everybody thinks you have to be something that you're not. The single hardest thing you have to do is just show up. But once you do, you're going to find there's just a ton of people who want you to succeed, no matter what you're doing. We have a lot of people who still come and all they do is shoot their concealed carry gear because that's literally what they want out of it, and they've become really really good, like scary good with like a P365 because they were introduced to a little bit of time pressure and that gave them a little bit of adrenaline, and they just and it's fun. And that's the thing about USPSA and IDPA 3 gun. This is something fun to do. And I think as long as we kind of keep coming back to that and remembering how much fun this game actually is, this sport actually is.
Yeah,
Um,
going back to what you were talking about in the very beginning about the Paracast podcast being like water cooler talk, that's most of what a match is.
oh
Like
yeah,
you're out there for hours, you're shooting for a couple minutes, but most of it is just kind of like BSing with your buddies,
yeah,
and it's a great social activity.
yeah.
So
And it's when I always tell people, as like I like this sport has rules, but at the end of the day, most people are doing this because they want to get out of mowing the lawn or mowing rocks. I don't know what you guys have there in New Mexico, but
a lawn takes a lot of work here.
okay. But no, most people are doing this just because they want to go do something fun. And I think you find that everybody really does have a good time doing this. And along the way, you get a lot of really, really competent and effective shooters out of the mix.
Absolutely, and with all of the participation that you guys have now, every once in a while I go and I look at who's shooting at SLPSA, and the amount of people shooting at an extremely high level there, especially people who were new just a year or two ago, is just it's mind blowing.
Oh, it
There's
is.
probably there's probably a cast of 30 or so people who are just top tier coming out of
Hmm.
that sport, and I'd like to build more of that skill into New Mexico. So
No, I think you will. I really do. We are at a great time in shooting right now. I mean, the availability to get components and firearms that are effective. There is so much fantastic information through just on YouTube alone, through like podcasts like this. There's trainers like Ben Steger who's putting out just, I mean, his entire class He's just putting it online for people to consume. There's so much great information. We never had any of that stuff when I started this thing. What is it? 10, 12 years ago. I mean, it was all just basically nothing. And so, yeah, if you want to start shooting right now, man, what a great time to start.
Yep, you're in a golden age, and I
Absolutely.
think when people get into the competition shooting world, they actually become really big 2A advocates, which is another big goal of mine too. I want people who care about firearm ownership and all of the good things that entails for society.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And that's the funny thing is when you when you get into the competition aspect of it, you learn safety at a much faster and better rate to the point where like I always make this joke that you become so accustomed to walking around with your finger indexed off and outside of the trigger guard that you'll be walking around the house with a DeWalt drill and your fingers indexed up on the DeWalt because to some extent you're walking around and you're keeping that DeWalt drill pointed at the imaginary backstop of whatever it is because we're just so accustomed to trying to be safe with firearms. And even with my children at home, uh, a gun is functionally it's just a tool. It's something I could basically leave a firearm laying around, and the kids they know so much about it that they've just become inoculated. It's functionally no different than my AirPods or something like that. It's just like, well, that's dad's stuff, and we know not to mess with it and to be safe around it, and that's fantastic.
Especially don't drop it if it's a Shadow 2 that you've touched.
My Shadow 2s are safe 70% of the time. If it's not loaded, it is safe.
That's all I need to know.
That's all you need to know. But yeah, that video that I did that I put out on that one, that was I'm like, maybe I should increase the spring weight on that thing.
Just don't drop it.
That's the way I look at the world. I mean, at least it's not a SIG.
Yeah. Well, fun. My father still lives in upstate New York, where I'm from originally, and he shoots at the club where actually it was a few years ago somebody dropped their tricked out CZ and it
That's where it
fired and killed
was.
an RO.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
and so that's pretty scary. But
Wow.
I
That
think that's
I was gonna say that was when that incident happened, that scared me enough because it was an indoor match and it hit the hard concrete. And I've always been really safe about holstering my shadows, but I became really, really deliberate when I holster that gun. I've actually become accustomed when I put the gun back in the holster, the gun is in the holster, and then I actually push down on it just a bit to make sure it's actually in the holster.
yeah, it's people need to be very diligent about that.
Yeah.
You know, even factory guns, SIG,
Yep.
can go off when they're dropped nowadays. That's not common for good designs, but it can happen for certain guns and certainly modified guns. And so being diligent about holstering a gun properly is a big deal. And I know Tim Herron has harped on people here who just like quickly unload, show clear, and like throw the gun back into the holster. It's no, like
Yeah.
you're not on the clock anymore. Like this is a very important step. Like make sure that thing is in the holster securely, especially if it's a race holster.
And that's
Those
actually
things can.
yeah. That's actually something that I talk about in the new shooter match that we do, where and I always tell them when it comes time to holstering the gun because we always talk about the under the make ready. And I say when you holster the gun, pull all your clothes out of the way, make sure that you can holster the gun with one hand and you look it in there and you take your time because no, the clock's not running. And even in the tactical world, even in the tactical world, if you had pulled that gun out and you were trying to stop bad guys from doing bad guy things, the only reason you'd ever holster that gun if there was no more bad guys doing bad guy things. So take your time. There's no reason to slam that gun back in the holster. Just take it easy, look it in, and you'll be fine.
For sure. And another thing that I see happen a lot with new shooters in particular is their holsters just falling apart. Lock, just like you Loctite your red dot and other things down to your gun, you need to Loctite your holster screws and the stuff on your belt,
Yeah.
because I've seen so many people, they start getting into this, they're actually training, they're putting reps on their equipment, and those screws are loosening.
Mhm.
And I, it, more than 10 times, I'm sure I've seen somebody's holster like fall off their belt, or at least a screw has popped off and it's super loose from the shell or something like that. And um, that's scary, but it's a good lesson, like about how to prepare your equipment. So
Yeah, and the nice thing about USPSA and IDP, all the practical shooting. I should just say the nice thing about practical shooting is there are people like you who are like, hey, I have gone down this path, and I know what you're experiencing. Here's what you need to do to fix this. And as I always tell people, they'll give you the gun to finish the match with, and it's absolutely true. People are so good about it. It's actually really funny because last week at our introduction match, we had two brand new shooters with those Shadow 2s, and they were both left-handed. And one of them
oh
was,
my gosh, you guys are multiplying.
I know, I
This
know.
is not good.
We're like gremlins and feed them after dark kind of thing or something. I don't know, man. But the one of them, he was having stovepiping issues, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching it. He stovepipes it on one of his stage, and then he went to the next stage and he stovepiped again. And my brain's like, oh, I know what's happening there. And and his father, he's like, what's going on? I'm like, I'll talk to you in a second. And we finished the stage and everything like that. And I pulled him aside. I was like, hey, pull that gun out for me, and I want you to show me your grip. And he goes and he shows me this grip. And as a left-handed shooter with a CZ, one of the unique problems is that it's very easy for your left hand, your left hand thumb, to get right in the ejection port way, and you will in some cases you'll actually stop the brass from ejecting properly. The only reason I know that is because I spent 2 years trying to figure out what was wrong with my gun before I realized it was me. But this guy, he odds are he would have gone through so much hassle because he told me, he's like, this has never happened before. I don't know what's happening. But I mean, in practical shooting, we experience all these problems, and so you have friends that are like, hey, I know what you're going through. This is how I solve
Yeah.
this. And so we did. We just
A,
talked about it. I'm like,
a,
this is how to
a,
fix it.
a community whose experience you can draw upon instead of figuring it all out on your own.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing how useful that can be. And I don't say that story to say like I'm special. It's just like I went through all these problems, and you see these problems in other people, and you're like, I am here to help you not have the same problems I had.
Yeah,
And
no, it's a great example. I mean, how niche. Left-handed Shadow 2 shooter inducing malfunctions because of how they hold their support hand.
yeah, it's the
Um,
goofiest thing, right? Why would
and
that matter? But it did.
and you saved him 2 years. So go out, shoot matches. You'll learn how to run your kit better, even if you don't care about classing up or winning matches. You'll be better, safer, more proficient shooter. So it's a great thing to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you're in Albuquerque, look up Del Norte Practical Shooting. That's pistol matches. Del Norte 3-gun, Zia 3-gun, Zia Action Pistol, um, Rio Grande Practical Shooting Club at the City Range. All these things can be found on our website called Practice Score. If you search those terms, and I always put them in the description of the videos, you'll be able to find matches. And you can always reach out to somebody like myself or Robert directly for questions about how to get started and find stuff. So, Robert, thank you so much for coming on
Well, thanks for
and
having me.
talking to me today. I think we covered a lot of good ground. Like I've said, I was really impressed by the shooting community in general in Salt Lake, the size, the skill, and I think everything that you do to make SLPSA a better club and to do your new shooter matches is a huge factor in all of that. And
Well,
so
thank you.
I try to pattern off of that to the extent I can. And I miss the Utah crew, yourself, Tom, Leo, Chance, Kenny, even though he doesn't shoot anymore, and Steve, all those great folks. So
We've got, and dude, you got to come back. It's amazing. Like we've got so many young and up and
Taylor,
coming
yeah.
people. I mean, like Zach he just had his first
Oh, and
kid,
Zach,
so
of course.
he's going to be coming back. But
Good, he'll slow down a little bit.
exactly.
Just kidding.
But
Yeah,
like Lucas and Jory, I mean, these guys, they were basically new last year, and they've just been tearing it up, and they've just reinvigorated the club. and it has been amazing. It's so much fun to see the young guys come in and just dominate and do so well.
SLPSA is a level 2, especially now. It's just it's so stacked there. Winning SLPSA is as good or better than winning many level 2s, I think. Like
I think,
that's a
yeah,
stacked club you guys have.
yeah, they've done a really good job with it. I'm really happy with it.
And I can't wait to come back to Utah State this year. It's one of my favorite matches. You guys do a great job producing that at SLPSA. Clay and everybody that puts that on. And I would encourage Utah folks who are interested in coming down and shooting in New Mexico, the Alamogordo range. I know it's less convenient than just flying into Albuquerque or something, but man, they've got a good facility. And I went and did a local there recently. They have a lot of experienced people designing the stages down there. It's going to be an awesome match. It's going to
When
be
is
two
it?
days this year. That's going to be in September. I'll put the dates in the comments of the video or something. There might also be the return of the High Desert Classic in, I think, June. And so again, when that gets confirmed, I'll make sure the dates are relayed here. That would be in Albuquerque again. That was a match that Chris Taylor used to run out here. That was a really awesome level 2. And
Okay,
so, yeah, there's some good options for New Mexico matches this year for majors.
that's
So,
awesome.
all you good Utah folks and others, please come down and
Well, New
we'll have a good
Mexico's
time.
and it's an easy flight too.
It's very easy.
So awesome.
Well, Robert, thanks again. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah.
And see you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.